measuring and our satellite sophistication, we can find that this single river, the Congo, drains an area bigger than India. India, the entire subcontinent, gathering all of its water into one river. And that river gets crouched gets squashed, it gets squelched together by a mountain range until it's only 200 or 300 meters across. So that means only one thing, it punches down. So it's the deepest river in the world, the most powerful river in the world. Between this sound and this, 40,000 tons of water have moved in this cataract. So if you could put your geographers' heads on, if you're geography students, or even just your wide-eyed internet consumers' heads, think of 40,000 tons. That's 4 times more than the highest flow that's ever flowed over Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, in Zambia. So it's a place of superlatives, the deepest. The things that come from there are mysterious and strange. It's powerful. It looks like a bomb going off all the time, the energy of the water gathering. And remember, this is the reason it's a secret for 400 years. You can't go upstream for those European explorers. You can't chart it. Everything about it is odd. Even the fish. Even this ugly monster on this picture, who's a man called Jeremy Wade, very ugly monster, from less. A fisherman who in recent years has gone. This is a thing called the Hydrocynus goliathus, the Goliath tigerfish. Tigerfish normally grow this long. This fella, the Goliath, will grow to 50 or 60 kilograms in weight. He'll take your leg clean off. He's the great white of the freshwater fish world. Freshwater river system. So everything's extreme about it. Things that grow there, the rivers, the water. It was impossible. This is the water churning through 40,000 tons. Can you see a 30-foot boat here? There's a 30-foot speedboat laboring to get through this, and that just captures why this area was. There is a little boat just at the bottom left sector. Bottom left sector, perhaps you could see. So the scale of this river beggars belief. And if I could give you one modern metric, one modern way that I might convey this to you, the last time the internet went off and your phones didn't work, it's because undersea cables near the mouth of this river were destroyed by rocks shifted by about 40,000 tons of water. So there's a modern iteration. There's a modern explanation, not just cups of water from the 15th century. So it's big, and it's difficult to navigate, and it keeps its secrets because of the cataracts. As historians, many of you will be history students, I know the matrics have been given a 3-line whip to attend, and thank you for that today. But as historians, we must always think not just about facts, not just about dates, treaties, and names, but context. The Europeans, the outsiders who wanted to go up this river and were defeated by cataracts, were also defeated by another very important factor. They got ill, really ill. Biology worked against them in exactly the same way that it worked for them in America. Any student of history will appreciate that Europeans arriving in the Americas had a biological advantage. They could cope with influenza and chickenpox. The indigenous community of Latin America and Central America and Latin and North America could not. The reverse is true here. In Africa, the Europeans would come, they would try to go up, if the cataracts didn't stop them, malaria did. So, for 400 years it guarded secrets. And in that 400 years, the Europeans did nibble at Africa, did go around the edge of Africa, did engage with ports. We're in one, Cape Town, a port city on the way to the Far East. And other cities around Africa were created. They were always, for the Europeans, resupply vessels, resupply positions. Freetown in Sierra Leone, Mombasa in what is now Kenya, Dar es Salaam, Zanzibar. Coastal towns, but they didn't go in for 400 years. And this is why the Congo for me is so interesting. Because when the Congo is eventually mapped, that is the turning point. That is the keystone. And if you could imagine building a bridge, a keystone is that last click, 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 click. You build a bridge, that last stone you need to put in to make the structure that you can walk across. It was the discovery of what happened where the Congo came from that was the turning point for for modern history in the continent. A history that all of you will have studied and all of you are living in actuality. So how does it change? For 400 years, impossible to go up the river. Finally, they find an explorer. 4'0", came from Wales. Wales, part of the British Isles. He went by Henry Morton Stanley was his name. He wore a very silly moustache and an even sillier hat. That's his explorer's hat. And he set off on a journey, as many Victorian explorers did, to chart, to better understand the continent, to better understand the planet. But again, the point that I find so powerful about this is that he wasn't just finding a geographical feature, he's changing history. And the reason he changed history is that by crossing the continent and exploring the river, let's just pause for a second and orientate ourselves. You see all of Africa top right in this image. And then the main body of the picture, the main body of the map, is the grey rectangle. So that's the equator. The Congo River is doing what it's always done, 40,000 tons of water every second. Boom, boom, boom. Out into the Atlantic, way over on the west coast. But Stanley decides the way to explore this area is to come in from the east. And he crosses Africa. It takes him 3 years, 900 odd days, 990. He starts in Zanzibar on the right, which is in the Indian Ocean. He gets a little bit lost, and sat-nav is off, and he ends up in what we now call Uganda and Lake Victoria. But you see his dotted line. But the point is this. It eventually hits that crescent, that sickle. Its handle on the coast, the tip of the sickle deep in Africa. And that is the deal changer. And the reason it changes is that by coming down this river, he finds a motorway. He finds a way to change things. He finds a fluvial superhighway. He finds a way that those outsiders who had only ever nibbled at the outside of the continent could go in. They didn't need to lay a track, they didn't need to build a road. Mother Nature had given them a river. And so this is why it's so important. This is why the Congo matters. Before Stanley and this trip, Europeans were on the edge of the continent. After this trip, all of Africa is staked by white colonial powers. I don't need to tell anybody in the room here how important that is historically. The modern history of the continent begins with a river exploration. He goes down the river, it almost costs him his life. He takes 3 European partners, they all die. He takes 300 Zanzibaris, 200 of them die or desert. He ends up, he even takes dogs, can you believe, Battersea Dogs Home in London. They all die. Eventually, getting a pattern here, getting the theme? He suffers. He starts with hair as brown as yours. He ends up with hair as white as mine, as grey as mine. He's absolutely exhausted. But the reason this changes things is he tells the world about a river that you can send manufactured goods up and take raw resources out. Does that ring any bell? Is that not the pattern of colonialism? Manufactured goods in, raw materials out. In, out. That exchange. And that happens all over. The continent changes. And within a few years of Stanley finding this river, the Belgian king, a king in Belgium, states this land in the center of the continent, and suddenly the rest of the continent is claimed. So in many ways, one single trip starts the firing gun, fires the starting gun for the scramble for Africa and the transformation. So, I'm drawn to this because as a historian I see the importance of this. If you run with me, I fly my drone really high and I say, what's the themes here? Stanley is the guy that changes it, but if I fly my drone really down deep, where I have to go is the Congo. This is a map that shows how the Congo changed, transformed under colonialism. And for me, it's actually a work of beauty, because all of those red lines indicate roads. And if you could get a finer detail of this map, you'd see buildings and mines and mission stations and what you might call modernity, change. This is happening under the colonial period. Be under no illusions that the colonialism that was in the Congo under the Belgians was at the brutal end of the spectrum. There's a name that might stick in your mind, a novel called Heart of Darkness. It's written about the cruelties of man against his fellow man in the Congo. And that book, even though it's well over 100 years old, it runs through our contemporary culture. There's a movie called Apocalypse Now, it might ring a bell with you. Vietnam movie, that is the story taken from the Congo moved into Vietnam. The Vietnam War in the 1960s and 1970s. The point is, it's slightly haunting. What goes on in the Congo under the colonial period haunts. It creates ghosts that won't go away. It challenges you, challenges me to better understand. So I, as an outsider, wanted to go back to Stanley's original journey and to go from Lake Tanganyika, which is a blue worm-like shape you can see on the right. I wanted to hit the river and follow it down. That's easy, right? Travel. Modern world, we just get onto our phones and get a ticket. Well, the logistics are going to be bad. First of all, I've got to deal with this. A series of wars going on in the Congo, the bloodiest on the planet. And if I could just ask you to grasp that for a second. The planet. Bloodier than Gaza, bloodier than Ukraine, bloodier than Afghanistan, bloodier than Iraq. 1,500 dead people a day in the Congo. A sequence, a strange almost mosaic of different conflicts happening, blurring one into the other. A Katangan secession, a post-Rwanda inter-Hamwe rebellion in the north. I don't need to run the names, but that's not important. Fly your drone high and look down, and what you're seeing is a country of war. So I had to deal with the war, then I had to deal with the logistics. Well, I'll just move through the Congo, surely it's easy. Well, maybe I'll take the roads. Well, the potholes, you might complain about the potholes here in Cape Town, but believe you me, they're worse than the Congo. I'll take a railway train. I know the bridges are gone. I'll reconfigure. Maybe I'll go back to the trucks. No, the trucks and the bridges, they don't work. So the logistics, how do you move? How do you move? You have to go back to Route 1 on foot. But the war was so dangerous, I couldn't walk all the way. And eventually, as is always the case with any outsider doing anything interesting in a particular place, I found the right local person, a man called Georges Mouillot. And he belongs to the Napoleon school of thought, which is the richest perfumes come in the smallest bottles. He's a pygmy, very slight man, but a giant in eastern Congo. An amazing man, very subtle, very strong, very clear. And he said, yeah, I could perhaps get you past those rebels. I could perhaps get you past those broken bridges. I could perhaps get you on your way. But he didn't actually say yes at any point. He said perhaps, peut-être, because he's speaking French. Anyway, with his help, I embark on this journey. Remember, it's purely a journey to try to understand whence this turning point came. This country called Congo, this space that had so much impact. So he said motorbikes, little motorbikes, not big motorbikes, not big BMWs that you see, strutting around in Camps Bay and the smart places in Cape Town. Those would be useless. They fall over, you can't pick them up, you can't fix them. You need a 100cc motorbike, a tiny one that you can pick up and carry. So here we go, and we go off on a bike for 600 kilometers. This is N1, this is the Route Nationale 1. It's like driving to Beaufort West. And this message I was getting, traveling in this place, was a very clear message. That the infrastructure, the things that you take for granted that will be here forever, can be abandoned. They slide backwards. And if I took one very, very simple lesson from this trip, it is that you cannot take infrastructure and society and community and everything that we work towards for granted. We have to keep at it. We have to work at it. We have to maintain it. Because if you switch off, Mother Nature will claim your highways back. For 700 kilometers of bounce on the back of a motorbike around, we're taking those yellow tanks because there's no fuel. There is no engine off-ramp. There is no Shell station. You take all the fuel you need. It's strange, but there's a test that I've run in different war zones over the world and different deprived areas that I've been to. 20 odd years working for a newspaper, and I call it the Coca-Cola test. You can always find a can of Coca-Cola, right? Find it in your shop around the corner here. I could also find it in the Sahara Desert. I could find it up a mountain in the Andes. I could find it in a desert in the Gobi Desert in China if I look hard enough. Coke's distribution network, their storage, their capacity to distribute things is that good. Well, this is one place the Coke test failed. I was in a place where it was so remote, the lawlessness so intense, the infrastructure so broken, that that simple test of a can of Coca-Cola, I failed. Proof that I was there, bound on the back of a motorbike. People, the Congolese who I met, who I engaged with through Georges and the motorbike guys and other guys I will be meeting later in the trip, have a way of focusing all of their energy on survival. And I found it quite inspiring. Inspiring because the Western model, as an outsider, is that survival isn't enough. We have to change, grow, and develop. We have to keep our little GDP curve going up. And if it dips, we call it a recession. And if it dips more than 3 quarters, we call it something worse. But in the Congo, survival is so challenging, it consumes everything. And this explains why a place that has had these wars for decades now just flatlines, because people use their imagination and their initiative to survive. Making sure you don't fall into this water. This river is near a place called Ebola, which gives its name to a very nasty disease. You don't want to fall into this river. I mean, look at the human ingenuity that goes into this. There's not a single wire, a single piece of manufactured string, or a single screw, or a nut, or a bolt. This is made of the living forest. And the energy required to do that is humbling. Again, I repeat, infrastructure that I've taken for granted throughout my life. This journey reset my calibration, reset my needle, because it taught me that the huge effort of just surviving yourself consumes everything. The ingenuity, absolutely humbling. A man called Muke Ungoya I bumped into on the trail, on our motorbike. That is a bicycle. Recognizable as a bicycle. You won't be doing the Argus on it. It doesn't have pedals, doesn't have brakes. It's not a bicycle like you or I use a bicycle. It's a beast of burden. This man is doing trade. Some of you will be studying economics, some of you will be studying accounting. This is literally the classic example of supply and demand. I have something which is in large supply here. I'm going to take it to somewhere where it is in a low supply, there's a high demand. Here the price is low, over there the price is high. He's carrying palm oil. Oil made from palm dates, palm fruit of a palm tree. And that's a very, very attractive thing in a place where he's going, where they have salted fish, salt, which they don't have back there. And he's pushing those kilograms, 40, 50, 60 kilograms of palm oil. But the really extraordinary thing is that he's pushing it from here to Beaufort West, 400 kilometers. Sleeping at night, maybe making 15 kilometers today, maybe making 20 kilometers if it's a good day and the path is a bit clear. And then he is lying on the floor and he press play and repeat for tomorrow. Because he knows that if he can get to the town at the end of his trail, in this case a place called Kalemi, he might make 30 American dollars, maybe 40. And then he walks home again. So that's walking an 800 kilometer round trip for maybe $40. It humbled me. It humbled me about my expectations about economic opportunity. It humbled me about my expectations about my understanding of human effort and endeavor. But to meet someone like this on the trail was absolutely humbling. How are we doing for time? How do you live? Food, carbohydrate, chips, potatoes, rice, barley, mealie. That's what we all eat, right? None of that in the Congo. Can't have carbohydrates in no shops. I've just told you there's no Coca-Cola, there's no Lay's chips. So you eat cassava. It's a root of a tree. It grows naturally in the forest. If you eat it, it'll give you some nutrients, some nutrition. Not particularly good. And here's another little caveat. Better take the skin off, because if you don't take the skin off, it'll poison you. It has arsenic in the skin. So you scrape off the skin, leach it in a river, put it in the river to let the river leach the remaining arsenic away. That's your carbohydrate. When presented as food, it tastes like rotting, fishy wallpaper paste. So, are you with me? Do you want to try that? That's your carbohydrate, day after day of that. Maybe with some leaves, maybe with this as a protein source. Okay? Bushmeat. You might have heard of this term and phrase, you hear it and you see it in your newspapers, that animals, wild animals, are the source of protein because there is no animal husbandry. I stopped in villages on the motorbike where to have chicken makes you a little target. makes you a target for those rebels. To have goats makes you a target. So you survive on what you can get. Maybe fish from the river, and maybe primates that you can hunt or trap or poison. So this is where the food stuff comes from. Again, just recalibrate for yourself. In the race of life, where are you starting? If you have to soak your cassava roots in a river in order not to poison yourself, you're starting way back. Communities, busy, crowded places. The children in this particular village I was struck by, they didn't meet me with the same sparkle that I meet when I've traveled all over Africa, the same sparkle in their eyes. They looked at me as an outsider, as a threat. And if you run the history of the Congo through your mind, you can understand why they might see you as a threat. At one point, a child took me to one side and said, "Do you want to see the bones?" The bones, we were stopping, we had a flat tire or something. Believe me, there's no silence like the silence of your motorbike stopping in the Congo. You don't know when it's going to start again. They said, "Do you want to see the bones?" this boy said, and we went. And I said, "Yeah, sure." So we found human bones lying. My background is as a journalist. Out of my pocket comes a notebook. Tell me, who is this? I don't know. I'm not sure exactly. Well, when did it happen? Well, I'm not sure if it was. There was one a year ago, and then there was one 3 months ago, and then there was a rebel incursion 2 years ago, and then there was the other one that I heard of when I was too young. But who was fighting who? Well, it could have been the army, but they were then fighting the Katangas, but then the Katangas fought against the Mai Mai, and then the Mai Mai fought against the Interahamwe, and the Interahamwe, of course, against the MLF, and the MLF, of course, against the AD. The details isn't important. The pattern is what I'm trying to convey. That the violence is systemic and ceaseless. And that means their bodies and bones go unburied. And that made me pause for thought. What has happened to your society if you can't even record and bury your dead? That is where the Congo has gone in recent years. We get to the river, and on the river I'm thinking, I finally made it to the river, I'll be able to take a boat downstream. I've been weeks on a motorbike, going through Katanga, going through this area where there were rebels. And this is what I find. It's a bit like a whale's carcass washed up on the shoreline in the Cape Point National Park. You just see the ribs and the scapula and the skull. You don't see the flesh and the organs. This was an old 1950s, 1960s paddle steam. It's huge. Can you see the person washing? What a right. That's how big it is. It's 4 or 5 stories high. And yet, like a whale's bones, they just bleach in the sun. Stanley hit the river and then pushed down for 2,000 miles. I'm now setting off, wondering how am I going to do it. We're 2,000 miles from the Atlantic, it's already a mile across, 1.5 kilometers across. And the river behaves strangely. Sometimes it's so still you think you're on a lake, but it should have a current. Sometimes you're moving in one direction downstream and the water is moving the other way. It defies all logic. Rivers going upstream, how does that work? Remember, I described a river so big, 40,000 tons a minute, in a second, all of these other metaphors, draining an area bigger than India. Some of the side streams that go into this river are so big that they can't flow out, so the water backs up and starts moving you backwards. It's rather disconcerting if you're paddling. It's like pedaling on a bicycle around the Argus and you're going backwards in the wind. Not a good feeling. I got that, as I mentioned, of Georges, and I mentioned of Benoit, the guys with the motorbikes, here are a crew who looked after me on the river. They were fabulous. Strangers to me, but they saved me. They kept me moving, they kept me safe. And there was a serene beauty to this part of the journey. We're getting to the end now, so I need much more of your attention, because the rivers do flow, they do move, eventually, as long as it's not backing up. But these guys, they sang in Swahili, a language imported, it has a bit of history to it. It was from the Arab slavers who came to East Africa. They sang in Swahili, and the lead guy at the back would sing, and the other guys would pick up the refrain, and the refrain told them when to put their oars in the water, their blades in the water. So it's like a very carefully structured thing. Remember that bridge, beautifully made out of ropes? Remember that guy pushing his bike? It's finding a way to deal with your environment, singing a song that teaches you how to move down the river, to employ the river. I've looked at a lot of art in my many decades on this planet, and I can rarely think of a painting more simple and more beautiful than this image, taken at dawn on the Congo River. Impressionism comes from France, it captures water so beautifully. For me, the natural beauty of this space is extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. It's the synthetic element, the man-made bit, which is more troublesome. Those Europeans who came, the Belgian king, that period, the tumultuous period of colonialism, the chaotic period of post-colonial violence. It is a place where it might feel remote, but I wonder if any one of you has seen the film Oppenheimer these last year and a half. The Oppenheimer story tells the story of the Manhattan Project. Well, guess where the uranium came from that had to be enriched for the first nuclear bomb? Here, in the Congo. That was then, in the 1930s and the 1940s. 20 years ago, guess where the chemical that's used in your cell phone set, your cell phone now, guess where that comes from? Coltan. It comes from the Congo. So there's an economic incentive there, but sadly, if there's lawlessness, there's also an economic challenge, because it's so tumultuous. And even now when they talk about rare earths, which are the next thing, the next minerals that we're going to need for our electric motor cars and our solar panels, guess where the greatest deposits of the world are? In the Congo. So there is this word that's attached to the Congo, which I'd just like to mention. It appears in other parts of the world, but I can think of no place where it's more acute. That is the curse. The curse of these natural resources that are sitting there waiting to be exploited, waiting to earn a profit. But it's the turbulent way in which they're acquired, the lawlessness where bodies aren't buried, the lawlessness where bridges aren't maintained, the lawlessness where rebels go unchecked. And that is why the Congo is such it haunts. For me, it's a haunting sense. It's on my conscience. I was aware of it before I went on this trip as a sort of ephemeral thing that didn't quite. Is it a place? Is it a piece of geography? Is it a bit of history? Is it a bit of actuality? And yet this trip grounded all together. It blended it all. Finally, I get to the mouth of the river. I get to the final cataracts. I'll give you one little anecdote. For decades, and then 100 years, Henry Morton Stanley, the first guy to go down the river and chart it, his last European partner drowned on the river, in the cataracts, in the place which is so tumultuous. And then in the 1980s, a French team go down, bodies never found. They were never found. A British team go into about 10 years before, they lost all their boats, but at least they walked away. A few years ago, an extreme canoeist decided to give the Congo a go, to canoe that session. Guess what country he came from? Any guesses? South Africa. True eccentric adventurer, Steve Fisher. And there he is. And there he is in green. He's underwater. And he went down a section of the river so tumultuous that no one thought he would make it. He wore oxygen. And you know what? He spent so much time underwater thinking he'd never go up. He's never canoed again. He was a career extreme kayaker. The power of this particular thing, this power of this river, the power of this place, it's not just measured in adventures and a kayaker who may or may not have lost his life. If I was omnipotent, if I was the Emperor of Ruritania for the day, I'd put my hydroelectric power station here, in this section where I mentioned 40,000 tons. That equates to 40 gigs of power. Basically 1,000 tons of water moving every second gives you a gig of electricity, plus or minus. 40 gigs of power, that keeps the lights on in southern Africa forever. No more load shedding. That's just one power station on a 200-kilometer stretch of river. And there's plenty of other places where it's in those 200 kilometers where the water is equally turbulent and equally funneled. I find that extraordinary. It's just waiting. And so just as it was with that guy, with the funny hat, the funny moustache, 150 years ago, he sensed its power and sensed its potential. And I hope I've conveyed a little bit of that to you today. It retains this extraordinary potential, an extraordinary, tantalizing promise, the Congo. And if only it was harnessed, what an extraordinary benefit it would be to all of us. Thank you very much. I didn't see a single hand doing this, so either we haven't got to 3:10, or you're incredibly right. Any questions? Quickly, anything that has crossed your mind as I spoke on this topic? Or we're all going to rush off for our 3:10. Any questions? There's one here.
On the slide before the extreme limits,
This one? That's Steve getting prepared in the upper section. So just imagine India, all of the rain falling in India going into one river, and then that river gathers its tributaries and its side streams, and then it scrunches into 200 meters of gas. That's why it's so extraordinary. It's because it's in only 200 meters wide, it punches down at such a depth that hydrographers haven't actually measured its full depth. You Google it and you see what is the deepest river in the world. It'll say the DRC, but it won't give a number. Just say the Congo, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Because there are some places, and get this, the currents are so strange at 100 meters, at 200 meters, that certain fish evolve and can only live there and can't come up. And if they do, their lungs burst because they have evolved with high pressure. And similarly, ones here can't go down there. There's an enormous amount of endemic fish in the Congo, and they grow without eyes because the depth is so extreme. A little cheeky superlative. Any other question? Where am I? Sorry, Mr. The question is, what is the scariest thing I encountered? Was talking to the Westerford multi is pretty terrifying. I think there were moments, guys with guns, there were guys, there's a very chilling word in French. You might know the word espionage, spy stories. The word for spy is espion. If someone in a French country comes up to you publicly and calls you a spy, espion, a mob can turn very quickly, and that happened once or twice. That was terrifying. But the moment that stays with me most was, in order to get onto the river, I painted a picture. I obviously covered all the details in this little presentation, but I got to the river and I came across some United Nations peacekeepers. Not much of a peace to keep there, but they're there. And there was a Uruguayan boat, and he represented the only powered boat for 700 kilometers. The only boat with an engine, because remember they're all rusted hulks. And so I came to the lift, and I said, how far can you? They said, well, we can take you this far, but we've never patrolled further. We'll take you maybe just another 5K, but we've never, because we're told from our security people, you can't go there. So I said, take me there. I did. I spent all day feeling increasingly nervous. And then two things happened. We get to this place. There's some people on the side of the river. I go, I speak to them, and I say, would you, for this many dollars, take me down the river? I need to go to this place. It's maybe 2 days, maybe 5 days. You don't know 3 days. And they take me. And the Uruguayan shakes my hand, and he says, are you sure? Because we aren't coming to get you. They're international. And the sound of silence as that boat, that powered boat, goes back upstream and leaves me, was for me a moment. But I said two things, because at the same time as being terrifying, it was also absolutely thrilling. Because it was like the purest form of travel. In travel in our world today, we just look at TripAdvisor, we know what it's going to be like. If someone's been there before, 5 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, we know what it's going to be like. That particular thing, that particular moment, was like standing on a diving board. High, 10-meter high diving board, knobbling knees. Am I going to jump? I don't know where I'm going to end up. And I did. And we went out on that boat with those guys paddling, singing. As they did, there's some soldiers came scurrying down the bank, and I'm saying, let's go, guys, let's go away. I don't like guys with Kalashnikovs, that's not good. And something very beautiful happened. A full moon rose. It was dark. So at the same time as fear, there was calm beauty. I think we're at the cutoff now. Guys, I've had your attention. I appreciate it's been the end of a long day. Thank you very much.
We would just like to say, on behalf of of the library committee and also everyone here today, thank you so much for taking this time out of your day to come and inspire us with your stories. And here is just a small thing to say thank you.